Bill, thank you again for sitting down with us.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. My pleasure.
And, one of the common threads that I keep hearing, throughout the weekend is hire the best and get out of the way.
Yep.
So what exactly does that mean to you?
It means you work with the professionals, whatever it is, whether it's a drummer, a bass player, an engineer, whatever, whoever the best that you can get, put them together and let them do their thing. Get out of the way.
And that's a pretty smart way to go about producing a record.
It worked for me.
So, when you were looking for musicians, did you have a core group that you relied on?
I certainly did. If I had a solo artist and I had to put a band around them, my drummer would have been Joe Vitale until this guy came along. And then the bass player would have been Willie Weeks.
Okay.
And my guitar player would have been Walsh or Felder, one of the two, whoever was available that day. Mm-hmm. And my keyboard player was a guy named Paul Harris.
Okay.
He was brilliant. He never made a mistake, ever. And it was just, unfortunately, he's passed away recently. But that would have been my core band.
Okay, and how many records do you think that you made with those guys throughout all the projects?
Combinations of those, maybe one or two guys would be swapped out. I would say a good dozen.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so you guys got to travel and stay with each other and, work on...
especially with Joe Walsh. When Joe wants to make an album, the first thing we do is, where can we go? For instance, we went on a 72-foot boat and took it down to the Florida Keys out of Miami to just rehearse, to do the rehearsals for But Seriously Folks.
And I've heard a little bit about this boat story from Michael.
Uh-huh.
Tell us a little bit more about it. How long were you out there? How did the idea come up? We were out there about
10 days.
Okay.
And we left out of Miami, went down the Keys, and we anchored off near, Plantation Harbor.
Okay.
About halfway down the Keys. And would get up in the morning and start rehearsing songs, recording. I had a 4-track machine on there with a board, I think like a little Tascam board or something, and rehearsed. And by the time we got back to actually do the record, they were everybody knew the songs, they were ready to roll.
So were those songs primarily written on that boat with
that album? Yes.
Okay.
He had a passel of songs.
Okay.
Another instance, we went to Catalina and took the record plant truck on a barge over to Catalina. And then there's this giant round building called the casino, and it's like 5-6 stories high. And the top story is this giant domed ballroom, and with a stage, and we set up there and recorded for about 10 days. And that was I forget the name of the album. Was it There Goes the Neighborhood? Oh, okay.
Okay,
Anyway,
so, that's pretty wild. When you add into places like Caribou Ranch,
right.
Being a pretty far out destination as well,
yep.
You guys have spent some time in some locales that aren't what I would consider major recording hubs making, hit records.
Yeah.
And one thing that I'm noticing about this, and it seems like a thread from your early days in the studio, is that you guys are working relatively quick. If you're writing, a whole record out there with those guys, in 10 days, things are happening, right?
That in those instances, yes.
Yep.
Now in the Eagles instances, no. I did that. Well, all the albums I did with the Eagles started with On the Border, and almost all the songs were written because they'd already recorded some of those with Glenn Johns, their first producer, and they put them on the shelf. They didn't like them. They wanted to rock out more. Mm-hmm. So that album took no more than 3 weeks to record.
Okay.
The next one was One of These Nights, and they had maybe 2 songs when we went into the studio. And that took a lot longer because there was a whole lot of trial and error, just finishing the song, getting songs done. And then Hotel California came along. There was 1 song written before we went into record, Try and Love Again, and nothing else. And that took 9 months to do. The last album, the big studio album, was the Long Run, which took 18 months.
Okay.
On and off, with a couple of month tours in there. And when we started that one, there were no songs. There was 5 guitar licks, and everything else was made in the studio.
Okay, and so when you're when you're working on that sort of stuff, you're producing, you're helping with arrangements. You're saying, I like, okay. And how long, you said about yesterday that you would tend to come back after dinner and you would work out an arrangement, over the night, and then the next morning you would come in and try and knock out the recording.
Exactly. Yeah, I try to get really good work done in the afternoon, and the search and destroy stuff at night. After everybody's loose after dinner, got a little buzz going. You can figure stuff out. Try this, try that. And by the end of the night, say midnight or so, you want to have a really good demo of, okay, this is what we're going to do tomorrow. And then the next day you come in 1, 2 o'clock, and within 6, 8 takes you should have it.
Okay, and so you have the whole band playing live, writing out these arrangements and productions, and then when they come back in the morning, the whole band's playing live again. But they're expected to be with bells on and ready to go.
Exactly.
Okay, and so how many songs, and we spoke about you revisiting Hotel California because of things like key changes and tempo changes, right?
Right.
So how many songs did you go back and revisit like that where you said, okay, this is great, we really like this song, let's re-record it?
That would probably be the only one of that album. The actual song Hotel California was done in 3 different takes. The first one, there were no words, there was no melody, it was just a groove. And at that point we called it Mexican Reggae. That was the name of the track. And then when Hanley started writing some words, he goes, oh, well, that's too fast. We got to cut it slower. Or I wasn't too fast or too slow, I forget. It was one of the two. And then he wrote more words to the second track and said, it's in the wrong key. Because now he had his melody, rounded up. And so we had to cut it the third time, and that's the one that's on the record.
Okay, so that is, awesome that you guys saw that through to see the final vision of it, but it wasn't really a common occurrence to be cutting the same song like 6 times. No. So it was more about coming up with a song and then recording that, and then if that song wasn't the one, just coming up with another new song, right?
Yeah, right. Move on.
Yep. And so how many of these songs do you think got past the point in that 18-month stretch on the long road? How many songs do you think actually went into, we're going to write lyrics on these?
We had, at one point, I had 18 tracks with no words.
Okay.
And the initial idea was we were going to go in and do a double album.
Okay.
This was like, the gauntlet had been thrown down by Fleetwood Mac, our arch rivals. And they were making Tusk, which is going to be a double album. Well, if they make a double album, we got to make a double album too. So that lasted, maybe 3 months. 18 tracks in, and what was it? 9 of them made the album.
Okay.
So half of them didn't. Half the tracks are somewhere on a shelf.
Okay, very interesting. But you guys were definitely collecting material, and then even from there, when you whittled that down, you were still left with twice as much material than what was on the final record.
Just musically.
Yes.
No words, just music.
Amazing. So, with that, if you could think back, is there a song that got left on a shelf that you wish didn't?
Oh, let me think about that. There's 2 of them that did actually get cut, but that I really wanted. One of them, I was doing a Mickey Thomas album. Okay. Mickey Thomas is the guy that sang Fooled Around and Fell in Love on Elvin Bishop's band. And I was doing a solo record with him, and there was a song that Henley and Fry wrote that had a verse, and it was called, they had the chorus, Too Much Drama Mama was the name of the song. And it was real funky, slow, funky thing. And I begged them to finish the lyric so I could cut it with Mickey Thomas. So they did, and it was on Mickey's album. And one other one was, it was called, the basic track was called Island of the Hidden Funk. And that wound up on a Joe Walsh record as, what was it, something of the Hidden Funk. I forget what.
I think he kept the same name.
It could be, yeah. But he finished the lyrics on that one.
Okay.
So those are the 2 that I really wanted to, get out there.
Okay, and they made it out there just in other forms.
Right.
You brought up Elvin Bishop, and one thing that I think that's incredible, and that I recognize from looking through your discography, is that you, when it comes to the majority of artists that you've worked with, and I'm talking like 98% of them, you go and look at their discography, and they may have made a lot of records, but their biggest records, hands down, are always credited to you.
Not always.
That's why I said 98%. You know, and I know that there's a running joke here, but you know, Elvin Bishop really, I think, you know, solidifies that for me. If you go look at his Spotify, "Fooled Around and Fell in Love" is at like 124 million plays.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the next highest song is like 1.7 million plays.
Right.
You know, that song is just
Yeah,
bigger.
it's a lot of people like that song.
It's a great song.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, how did that come together? You know, it's very different than a lot of the stuff that he did.
Actually, that was the last track cut for that album, and they were looking for. They said we don't have a hit single on this album yet, and Elvin pulled out the verse that he had, and I think they knocked it out. You know, finished the song and knocked it out in a matter of 3 or 4 hours to finish the song. And we cut it pretty quickly, and that would just, it clicked.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So when you're cutting these songs so fast, was there a lot of time to sit and think about the mix, or were you just mixing with what you had with you, around you? Were you ever trying to
I would think ahead there. Well, if I know this is going to go on the right, this is going to, I would be thinking ahead.
Yeah.
And then when I got there to the mix portion of it, it was 9 times out of 10 I was on the right track back during tracking, overdubs, vocals. If I do this here, then I can do that there. It's a call and response maybe, or something like that.
Absolutely. And one thing that I think is lost on the younger generation that's making records today is the performative aspect of what you were truly doing back then, because those mixes, they went down live. All of those effects that turn on and off, those weren't printed. They happened while you were recording to a 2-track, correct?
Exactly.
And so it was, pretty choreographed set of moves where once the song started, you didn't really
You better get your shit together.
You weren't listening to the verse, you were playing it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Some more complicated than others. I mean, some are just straight ahead,
So, as far as like a more complicated one, what's a song that you really remember being like, okay, we ran 6 or 7 passes of that mix to try and get that down?
Oh, I would say Hotel California.
Okay.
The track Hotel California. Mm-hmm. And that is one of my favorite tracks ever, and one of my favorite memories ever is doing all the guitars sitting at Criteria with that board and have Felder on one side and Walsh on the other in the control room. And just, okay, I'll play this, you play that. Okay, if I answer this, you answer that. If I go up high, you got to go low. And it was just like 3 days of punching, but it was amazing.
And so, a lot of those guitar lines, when they're playing in harmony with each other, they were just on either side of you writing those, weren't they?
Yep, fabulous.
And so how many songs do you think you knocked out in those 3 days?
No, that was just those guitars.
Just for
all the electric guitars.
Just for Hotel California.
Yeah.
Okay.
A good 2.5, 3 days.
Oh, wild. When you say that, I thought you were talking about the record.
No.
3 days. So, overall, with production, what were you trying to lay down as the band? What was the backing track for Hotel California?
Everybody in the room at once. So that depending on what the song called for, it could be Glenn on piano, Felder and Walsh electric guitars, and Henley drums, and either Randy or Timothy on bass.
Okay, and so they lay down, 2 guitars, a bass, piano, and drums.
Right.
And then from there, are you keeping the guitars that they lay down there, or are you retracking those?
Maybe. I mean, most of the time, yes, I'm keeping them.
Yes.
I may have to punch in a lick here or something there, somebody's a little flat or whatever, or somebody misses a cue or a lick. And then you just punch it in and move on. But I tried to get as much live as keeper stuff as I possibly could.
Amazing. So then for those 3 days, you're focusing on the guitar overdubs, all that singing guitar that's happening, especially on the second half of it.
Especially the second half, but not just that. If you listen from the top, there's stacked guitars constantly throughout that whole track from the jump.
How many guitars do you think are on that song?
Jeez, I'd have to look at the track sheet, but and one, the 12 string. 8.
8.
I would guesstimate.
Okay.
8 different types. I mean, and some was like, well, I got to play the Tele here, I got to play the Les Paul here, I got to play the Strat here, and and a mix and match all the way.
So were you consolidating those things down, or were you leaving those across 8 tracks on the multi-track?
I think it got down to like 4 to 6.
Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, there's the 12 strings in stereo, and the rest are all mono, but stacked differently in the mix.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one thing that I love about that you just brought up is like sometimes it's a Telecaster here, sometimes it's a Les Paul there.
Right.
Nowadays in modern productions, a lot of people would use different tracks for things like that. You were just saying, okay, this is that guitar track that's doing this.
Right.
You would record
Same track.
Yep, exactly.
I got 24. You got to do everything there on 24.
Yes. So, if you spent 3 days on the guitar production, how many days do you think you spent in total on a production for a song like that?
Oh, God. With the basic track, that'd be 2 or 3 days. Editing would be a day. Overdubs would be, depending on how complicated, a good between vocals and whatever other sweetening, guitars, leads, etc. That'd be another 10 days. So you could spend a month literally on one complicated track.
And how many songs in your career do you think that you spent that amount of time on?
Not very many. Not that long.
Yes. And how many hits have you had?
Oh, I don't know. A couple, 2, 3.
Yeah, and that's what it's so interesting to me is like there's clearly more than one way to do this.
Oh yeah.
And something like
B.B. King, The Thrill Is Gone, that was done in one day. It was done in maybe 1 hour of 1 3-hour session, and the strings took a half hour, maybe an hour, and the mix took maybe an hour. So that's 3 hours.
Wild.
There's the yin of that yang.
And when I listened to that song yesterday, and the thing that just stuck out to me is it sounds exactly the way that I believe it should.
Good.
And I'm assuming that, as you said, when you hire the best and you get out of their way,
right?
You push the faders up, and it's probably pretty pleasing. You're not fighting things, right?
No, not in that one.
And another thing that I find so very interesting about the work that you did is that you made great records, from what I can tell, out of a lot of stuff that was put in front of you. People would bring in their own drum set. People were bringing their own guitar amplifier.
Most of the time.
Yeah, and you were happy to put a microphone in front of it and
sure.
Get a great sound. Is there any time that you remember finding yourself in the studio and you're like, we got to get this drum set out of here and get a different drum set out of here?
A few times.
Okay.
Yeah. Somebody would bring something, or you'd go to a studio and you thought you were going to use their kit, and their kit sucked. And like, okay, then you got to get on, call SIR and get some drums in here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so SIR, they were primarily
studio instrument rentals.
Yeah. Oh, but you working with them primarily out in L.A., or did they ship stuff to you, Miami?
Miami we had another company that was renting stuff. I forget the name of it. And in New York it was SIR also. They were both LA, New York.
One thing that I find, very interesting about your productions, a lot of people would consider that you made a lot of classic rock productions. Mm-hmm. But when I go back, even deep into it, when you get into something like Barnstorm, there's very interesting, for the time, very forward-thinking effects and the use of synthesizers mm-hmm. and stuff like that. I would consider those things not classic, almost experimental productions in certain aspects of what you were mm-hmm. going for. Back then, did you feel like you were literally on the bleeding edge of what was happening?
We hoped so. That Barnstorm is probably my favorite album I ever made.
Really?
Yeah, not only because of the music and because of the way it turned out, but the conditions under which we did it. Mm-hmm. Which was we were all on our own. The first record ever done at Caribou, and there was no maintenance guy there. We had to fix if something broke, we had to fix it. Thank God for Vitali; he can fix just about anything. And it was just the four of us, against the world, if you would, And it was Joe's coming out party from the James Gang, and everybody expected a hard rock record all the way through. And there's some 2 or 3 things that'll knock your socks off, but there's a lot of very poignant moments and acoustic stuff.
Yeah, a beautiful, classical sounding acoustic guitar work. And, I love, like, when things catch my ear, a little ear candy's like, there's a synthesizer making wind here in the background.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
And I think that's so cool. Did you, like, show up with synthesizers for those sessions? Did they show up with synthesizers?
Yeah.
So you had some synthesizers back
No,
then?
I didn't have it. It was Vitale. Both Joe Walsh and Joe Vitale each had one of these ARP Odysseys.
Okay.
And when the first ARP Odyssey came out, and I think, as a matter of fact, Pete Townsend gave Joe Walsh his ARP Odyssey when he moved up.
Okay.
To do something else or other. But I know that Townsend turned him on to it.
Very cool.
If he didn't give it to him.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And, the use of effects, things like backwards reverb and stuff like that, you didn't have a lot of processors. You were making those things with a plate and a tape machine, right?
Pretty much.
Wild. So how long would you spend on experimenting for something like that? an effect like that, there's a little bit of trial and error to it.
There is.
And it can take some time.
You have to take your 2-inch tape and turn it around so it's playing backwards, and then you have to figure out what track was empty, because if you hit the wrong one, you're screwed. Something's going away.
Yep.
And then you record the echo return from whatever it is that you're sending it. Turn the tape back over and hope that it's right. And if not, you keep back and forth, back and forth. That's especially with, like, backwards guitar solos.
Yes.
That's where your brain as a guitar player has to think in reverse. So when you start playing, that's the end of the solo. When it's eventually going to be. So you got to be cranked out, and then you have to, ease it off to the end. So when you turn it over, it starts low and it builds to a crescendo.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So, how many days do you, there's a couple backwards guitar solos that I can think of in your work. How long do you think you spent trying to knock out one of those?
Oh, maybe a day.
Okay.
You just experiment.
Wild.
Yeah.
And would you try and take them in chunks, or was it one of those things where it's like you're playing that solo backwards?
Well, you punch in parts. If I got 8 bars and it's a 16-bar, solo or something, you could go 4 bars at a time or something, just stack it up. But it was all on the same track.
Yes.
Right. You're just punching in on the same track.
Yep. So, do you ever remember in your career where there was a bad punch?
Geez, hundreds. Everything didn't always go right,
Absolutely. I think that bad punches and the idea of erasing something permanently from a tape machine is something that scares a lot of young engineers nowadays.
Yeah.
And I've done it myself personally.
Yeah.
And what I found is you just say, "Hey, record that again."
Yep. I'm sorry, we got to do that again, boys.
Yep. So, but is there anyone that you remember where you're like, that one stung?
What do you mean?
Like in your career, is there
where I fucked up?
Well, I wouldn't call it a fuck up, but just something that happened in the studio where you're like,
I can tell you one thing: Coca-Cola and magnetic tape do not go together.
oh, was it your fault?
My fault.
So you spilled a Coke on
On a tape.
on the actual tape or the machine?
On the tape.
Just the box.
Just the tape.
Okay, so was there a way to save
it ate it. It ate it in a heartbeat.
Oh, I could imagine what that goop looked like in that box.
It was horrible.
Oh,
horrible.
Man. When it came to the vibe of a studio, was there anything that you were doing as a producer to try and enhance that? I see a beautiful lava lamp here. Did you have lava lamps?
Oh, yeah, always. Yep. We don't call them lava lamps. They're karma generators.
Karma generators. Well, that's one of the biggest karma generators that I've ever seen.
And it generates a good ton of karma.
Absolutely. So when you were, taking over one of these rooms, did you have like a kit that you'd come in and throw up?
No, usually if I'm working at a place, I'm there for a while.
Yes.
We're booking 3 weeks at a clip. So yeah, I would bring some stuff in. But the main thing as far as atmosphere is be up. Be light, but be serious.
Yes.
That's it.
And that's been kind of a topic of conversation over this weekend, which is, be serious about what you do, but don't take yourself too seriously.
Exactly, yeah.
And you know,
This ain't rocket science. This is making records.
Hey.
This is we're supposed to be having fun doing this. You're not going to an office and punching the clock. You're here to entertain.
Mm-hmm. And you've overseen some of the biggest songs in rock music and music in general, and some of the biggest shakeups in music in general. Was it always fun?
No, The Who. The one and only album I made out of the country, and I went to London for it. And the band themselves it was the first album after Keith Moon had died. There was a lot of drug use amongst the band. The band pretty much hated each other, and I had to try to get something out of that. And that was the hardest record I ever had to make.
Oh, and how long were you there? You were there for months.
I spent 6 months over a period of a year in England.
Wild.
Yeah.
And
it was fun being in London, but that was the one album where it was not particularly fun going to work.
Has there ever been a project that you walked away from?
No.
You finished them all?
Yeah, if I took it, I'm doing it.
That's awesome.
I have turned people down and not even started,
Mm-hmm.
But no, I've never quit in the middle of something.
One thing that I've noticed about your career as well is it seemed that you were a start and then finish the project sort of guy. You didn't have too many projects that were overlapping, right?
Not very many, no. If I'm committed to something, I'm there to do this project and then take 2 weeks off and then start the next one.
I think this is all very, very exciting, and I just have a couple more questions that go into, your work as a producer. Did you carry your own microphones? We spoke about that a little bit yesterday, but do you remember which ones those were?
I always carried my KM84, my KM84 for the acoustic guitar. And at one point I had a pair of them, and they were just gorgeous. And unfortunately, I don't have them anymore.
You don't have either of them?
I got one, but it's down. It needs to go to the mic doctor.
Okay, yeah. The first night that Michael and I ever spoke, he told me about that microphone. That's the microphone you recorded Hotel California
Exactly. All acoustic guitars.
Yes.
Yeah, they were just brilliant.
And where'd you like to place that?
Over the soundboard, over the sound hole, maybe about 8 inches out.
Okay, so you pointed at the sound hole.
Yeah, but slightly on an off angle.
Okay, an off angle towards the butt of the guitar or towards the neck?
No, toward the neck.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so if the guitar is here, this is the neck, about like this.
Awesome. That's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
And those are incredible sounds. And one thing that I love about talking to you about making records and even going and seeing, photos of your beautiful Bayshore studio, you didn't rely on a ton of stuff the way that people rely on stuff nowadays. Nowadays, every console has a compressor and a gate on every channel. I mean, Bayshore, when you decided to kit out a place for yourself, I remember there were pair of LA3As, 4 1176s, like maybe one.
Couple 2 DDLs,
Yeah.
the Eventide DDLs.
Yeah, one DBX 160.
Yeah, which I very seldom used.
So, where did, if we could work our way from memory down the 4 1176s, where would they end up?
It depended. If it would be, I always would knock a little bit of compression on an acoustic guitar.
Okay.
And then maybe about 2-3 dB at the tops.
Mm-hmm.
And the lead vocal,
Yep.
always out. I would use the LA2s for the bass.
Okay.
And there you go. And I very seldom would compress drums. Very seldom.
Very seldom compressed
Yeah.
drums. And that's just so interesting to me because most people nowadays, they think that they need to be compressing their drums. They need that smack, and the smack comes from a compressor. When the smack
Not
comes
really.
from those professionals that you hire, right?
Yes.
So you have a couple DDLs, which, the Cooper Time Cube, you're pretty famous for, in my opinion. You also had a couple Eventide DDLs,
Right.
Were they pretty interchangeable, or were you using them for specific things?
Specific things.
Okay.
Like, for instance, in Rocky Mountain Way, in the verses, there's the DDL's got two different settings on it. One short and one slightly longer, so it's left and right of the lead vocal. And then when we get to the chorus, those go off and the time cube goes on.
Yes.
So it just, gives your vocal a different attitude during the chorus, and then back out wide for the when you come back to the verse.
So when that move went down in the mix, was that as simple as pressing 2 aux on buttons?
Pretty much.
Yeah, because you were on the
Yeah.
MCI and they had the ability
Right.
to turn each one on.
Yeah.
So you had one going that was going to the DDLs, and then you had the other one going to the time
Going to
cube.
the time cube,
and
right.
then the verse ends and boop.
Yep, that's it.
But you had to do that a couple times in the song.
Right.
And you had to remember to do it as it was going down. How many times do you think you ran off the mix when you were working on this?
Oh, I don't know, 10,
Okay.
10 dozen, whatever.
But it wasn't one of those things where you ran off 300 of them.
Oh, no, hell no,
Yep.
no. At most, maybe 20.
That's awesome. So you were relatively recording quickly, mixing quickly. Some projects were outliers,
Right.
but for the most part,
If the song was done, yeah, we could rock through it.
Absolutely.
If the song wasn't, then we're going to spend a lot of time in the studio figuring out how to finish it.
So when it comes to The Thrill Is Gone being a 3-hour project, how many songs do you think went down like that throughout your career?
Early on, and mostly with B, because B would sing and play, and that would be it. And I think I only overdubbed lead vocal on him on 1 or 2 things. And the rest, he was live in the studio. He would do it. So that, of course, makes things easier down the line. You're not spending time overdubbing vocals.
So what vocal mic were you using with him?
I think I actually used a 57 on him.
Really?
On that, yeah.
Great rejection, right?
Yeah, I had to. That was, I need something that's right here, not an 87 or something like that.
And it's a great vocal sound.
Yeah, works. It worked.
Do you remember any specific cases where you used things like that, dynamic microphones and stuff for vocals?
Mostly on him because he was live, and I knew I knew that was going to be the vocal. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Were there too many vocal tracks? Because one thing that you told me is that besides the Who being buttholes for the most part, people decided to sing live with the band.
Right,
you wanted
yeah.
to have someone lay.
I always wanted to have, even if it's a dummy vocal,
Yes.
if we got something, somebody sing this, so all the players know, okay, what's happening here.
So, did you keep any of those vocals?
Maybe once in a while.
Okay, I was just curious if there was ever one that stood out.
No, nothing that sticks out. No, it was always just there to be the roadmap.
Okay, and before we end this conversation, I definitely want to veer into one thing that I don't think a lot of people credit to you, but your work with Edgar Winter and Rick Derringer. How did that come about?
Rick had a great idea. He was ahead of his time on this. He wanted to make a record, and he wanted two cuts by 6 different producers. He had all these producers in mind. Half of them I think were Brits, and I was one of them. So he called me up, and we had met before in New York, and he said he told me his idea, and I said, so I get 2 songs. And he goes, yeah. I said, oh wait, come on, and then we did these in Colorado, at Caribou, and I put my band, Vitale, Walsh, Paul Harris, with him, and we cut 2 tracks. He said, oh, great. And I'm going to go off and work with these other 5 producers and so on and so forth. So a couple months go by, and he calls me and he says, everybody's busy or they don't want to do it or da-da-da-da-da. Why don't we just finish the record? I said, fine. So he came back out to Colorado with just him and a drummer, and we did the whole album. Most of the album. We did all the basic tracks, all the guitars, and then we took it back to New York and did some overdubs, curls and sweetening and things like that. And after that, he liked the way that I worked, and he said, would you engineer for me? I said, sure. I needed work at the time. It was like one of these, in between gigs, or I even forget what the deal was, but I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I came and engineered They Only Come Out at Night for Edgar, and Still Alive and Well for Johnny Winter.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So where did you go out to engineer those?
At Hit Factory, New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was still your stomping ground.
Oh, yeah.
So, the Caribou Ranch days, you were only there for pretty much a very brief period of time.
I was only there for about a year.
But, how many projects did you do there?
I did 2 Joe Walsh records, Barnstorm and the Smoke You Drink, the Rick Derringer record, and pieces of others. I mixed a Jay Giles album there, Ladies Invited. I did some Michael Stanley overdubs there, and some Jay Ferguson overdubs there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and then Jimmy came back from his movie and kicked me out of his studio. How dare he?
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. It's been a ball.
We really appreciate you, and if there's anything you need, just say the word.
You got it.
Awesome.
Thank you, brother.